Welcome to Irreconcilable, the divorce podcast. We officially have a name, and this is like the real deal. Last time was more like a pilot episode, right? And I think what I didn't do a good job of last time was introducing each of you and myself. So I am Matthew Sullivan. I am the COO of Sullivan Law and Associates, and I'm here with our founding partner, Richard Sullivan, who's been practicing law for 48 plus years.
I think it's 48.
Did you keep counting or have you stopped counting?
I stopped counting.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's probably good.
Clock
Yeah.
doesn't stop even if you stop counting.
No need to count anymore.
You've been practicing long enough. I think
Long enough.
is what we're going after.
I'm going to get it right one of these days. Yeah.
And then Rachel Bennett here, who has been practicing for 10 plus years.
10 plus.
10 plus. You haven't started counting that 11, or is it? When is that?
Oh, I mean, when you get into like months, it's like, I mean, it's not a baby. I don't need to say like 10 years and 3 months.
5.5 years old,
Yeah.
right? Not 5. I'm 5.5.
My baby is 36 months old. Yes. Well, welcome back to all of our listeners. We are going to be covering an interesting topic today. We're going to be covering community property. And we are asking ourselves, what is really half? Half is in quotations here.
Okay.
Question mark on the end of that, because I think a lot of people are a little confused on what community property is and how it's dealt with here in California. So we're just going to touch on some of those subjects. Does that
Okay.
sound good?
I think it's a great subject to talk about because a lot of lay people and some lawyers as well don't understand what community property is or isn't. And I think it's important that people understand that. Obviously, if they're going to think about going through a divorce or they're in the divorce process, I like to define it as it's simple, really. It's all property acquired during the marriage is community property. And I believe it's Family Code Section 760 defines what community property is. And so I often relate to people the following. Think of when you get married, that's a fence post. It's a boundary. It's a bookmark. It's, okay, we know when you get married because there's a license, there was a ceremony, everybody got drunk and had a great time, right? That's the community springs into existence.
Hopefully it was an open bar. Right?
Yes, hopefully it was. But everybody has hope eternal, And so that's one boundary. That's the one fence post. And then as the community goes down the road of life, certain parts of the dream fall off, perhaps, but then you have a date of separation. And that date of separation is the other fence post, the other boundary, the other bookmark. And that's when the community dies. It's no longer in existence. And the date of separation is a legal term that we can discuss later. But between this date of marriage and this date of separation, that's when we characterize property. In other words, is the character separate property? It would be if you had it before you say I do. If you had that business, you had that home, that could be characterized as your separate property. But after date of marriage, if you acquire something or incur something, that's a community property, usually debt or asset. So we characterize it as that. Then we value the asset as, whatever the value is, and then we divide it. So that's the simple, I think, explanation to the lay person. This is community, this is not community. And again, after this date of separation, when the community dies, then all your acquisitions, assuming it didn't come from a community property source, would be that person's sole or separate property. So That's kind of an easy way, I think, to tell people what it is or isn't what it isn't, in other words.
And I think getting into the details of what's community property, what are the community property rules is really important, because I think if you ask anyone who's been in a divorce, they're going to tell you probably word for word, I know exactly what community property is. I know exactly what separate property is. But if you ask a lot of unmarried people or married people, can you explain to me what's community property, what's not community property in California? They'll look at you like, I don't know.
Right.
It's like, you need to know that you're the one in the middle of in between the fence posts, right? So getting into this now and being knowledgeable about what property rights you have if you are currently married, and what property rights you're going to be creating if you are contemplating getting into a marriage is so, so important. So I think having this conversation and being able to really explain this to our audience is going to be well worth the time.
Well, let's
No,
back this up a little bit. Why is community property important? Like, it's good to know what it is and isn't, but why is it important?
well, because it's the wealth acquired, the assets acquired during the marriage, one spouse is gonna want their share. So there's the other spouse. So they're gonna want, half of the equity in the home or, half of the equity in the business or half of the 401k account or whatever savings account there may be. But I just wanna back this up a bit because a lot of people, they come to us, Sullivan and Associates, and they say, "Hey, I want a prenup," right? Well, prenups have a chilling effect on a new marriage, right? Because you're going in with love and lust into I'm going to get married, and you say then sign on the dotted line. This is our prenup. Well, you can have that prenup, and that's all well and good. But if you have substantial assets before you marry, the law says those are your separate property assets. As long as you don't commingle them, if you don't mix them up, then maybe you don't need this prenup. Maybe you don't need to have this chilling effect on, this relationship you're about to enter into. As long as you don't commingle it or transmute it, as we say. Now if you have a business, a separate property business, it may be a little different, and maybe you do need that. Um, but that's a
Check
consideration
one,
that
two,
people
three.
don't often think about. They just want a prenup because they
Check.
think, well, that's the
Low
end all
testing.
that means all. But it really does have an effect on the relationship itself, going down the road of life. So
Well, and it could, or I'll kind of counter that.
okay,
I like I like the idea of a couple who has strong enough communication skills and a strong enough idea of how they want the marriage to be. Because if you get married, you have no prenup, you're still signing a contract, right? You're just signing a contract with the state of California over what your property rights are. You go from a single person to a married person, um, on, you know, let's say you get married on Saturday. On Friday, all of your income is your income. All of the money in your bank account is the money in your bank account.
right.
All of your retirement rights are your retirement rights. By Saturday afternoon, when everyone's drunk, hopefully,
And happy.
and
Don't forget
happy,
happy.
drunk and happy. I missed the happy part. At that point, you've now converted 50% of your earnings from that day forward are yours, and 50% are your spouse's, 50% of your retirement rights, 50% of what goes into the bank account, right? So
But you still maintain your separate property component until you say I do. And then you're right. Then you transmute it into but don't you think, Rachel, if you're going into a relationship and you say, okay, we're not going to have joint bank accounts, right? Because, this is mine and that's yours over there. We have a mutual account to pay our mutual expenses. I've been married 40 plus years and we've never had that. I'm still in love and lust with my bride. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm old and traditional. That's just the way a partnership should work. But
yeah, well, but I think everyone should be free to set the terms of
sure.
their own financial future as they see fit. And what I've written hundreds of prenups, and there's a bit of a counseling process that needs to happen, and when each side lawyers up, just the way that that is structured, it doesn't allow for really open communication between both sides and their lawyers because there's some positioning and some posturing that tends to happen. But I really do think there would be a benefit for people to go in and do almost premarital financial counseling with kind of under the umbrella of understanding what do we do with our finances once we sign this marital contract. And maybe they look at all of the community property rights that are going to be established and they go, I totally agree with that. Opt me in. I don't want to make any changes whatsoever. And I think that is a well-informed decision that you and your spouse can make together. But if somebody looks at that and goes, well, I don't know that I want to share all of the retirement rights. Let's talk about how we want to plan for our future, right? I think that's an indication of, first of all, thoughtfulness in terms of financial decisions. It allows them to make joint decisions together, and I think makes the process of getting married perhaps even a more collaborative one rather than, well, we're just gonna let's not talk about it. I don't want to deal with that. That's unromantic,
Right.
right?
It's love and lust. And
Right.
that's why we got married, and we'll figure it out as we go down the road of
Yeah.
life.
Which is lovely,
Yeah.
but that's not what you're doing when you get married,
Right.
right?
Well, this is good advice for people who aren't even going to get a prenup. Like,
Mhm.
let's have that conversation. Let's put it out all
Mhm.
on the table here to figure out what it is that we're going to do with our financial future. I mean, that just sounds wise to do regardless,
Yeah.
whether you're going to,
But
get a
do
prenup
people
or not.
but do people do that?
No, they
No,
don't.
they don't do
No!
that.
That's the
They
whole
don't.
point.
No.
That's my point. That's my point.
And
Yeah.
then we
They
get
don't.
these questions
Right.
once they're divorced, and I have someone sitting in the conference room going, "What do you mean she gets half of my retirement account?" Well, dude, you got married
Right.
and you've been married for 15 years. Half of that during that 15-year period
Right.
is hers.
Right.
And if you didn't like that rule at the beginning, that's
Because
where the prenup comes in, and that's where that sets the terms. And if you don't like that and you can't come to terms, then don't get married.
right. Live together and do whatever you're going to do. Right. Don't get married. Right. No, I understand. I mean, that's not the human condition or nature. Typically, we're going to sit down and map this whole thing out as a business plan. That's usually doesn't happen. So anyway, so date of marriage, date of separation, uh, and and a lot of people say, well, it's not fair, and I typically where the fairs in Pomona or Costa Mesa,
You said that last time.
it's not in that law book. So and people often say, I want a divorce, I only want what's fair, but that's the perception that either party has that doesn't really meet the other party's understanding.
There's also another perception that, okay, we have some understanding what community property is or isn't. Some people, I'm sure you guys have heard this, where they will just keep their accounts separate, and they feel as though, hey, this is separate property because we didn't actually like commingle our
And
finances.
no,
All right. Yeah.
judge
You
is
guys
gonna
want to elaborate on that at all? Like, let's bust that myth.
Yeah, yeah. That's a title issue, right? So, bank accounts in my name. I put all of my paychecks into it, but we have no prenup. So by default, any of my income during the marriage is going to be considered community property. Whatever I buy with that income is considered community property. Let's say I put all of my money into a bank account. I've saved $100,000. I used part of that to buy a car. I finance, I buy all this stuff, and and everything's titled in my name. Now I go to divorce, and the divorce court's going to say, "Oh, well, thank you for all of that community property. How are you going to equalize for your spouse's half?"
not to divide by two. Well, but let's kind of section that out a bit. Let's just assume. Well, let me play on that a bit. Let's just assume that one of the spouses they acquire a home during the marriage, and one spouse is not on the loan and not on the deed because they had bad credit, and it was cheaper and better, financially, to not have that spouse on the loan. And they come to you and they says, "Well, wait a minute, I'm titles in my name and it's my separate property." Well, and you're wrong because we get back to 760 of the Family Code. Assets acquired during marriage are community property and gets divided equally. So, but you also have the often scenario that somebody owned a home before the date of marriage and it's titled in their name only. Obviously, they get married and then some point in time they get a divorce, and let's just assume the spouse does not go on title at that. So but the community does acquire an interest, and that interest would be based upon the marriage, the pay down of the mortgage and the equity, the increase in the equity of the home. We typically refer to that as a mors marsden uh, interest in the home. May be small, but there's still an interest, as opposed to, okay, title's in my name before I got married. Now we get married, and the twist now is I put her on title. So the question is, did you transmute it? Under 852 transmutation statute, or uh, uh, you know, does she, in other words, does she acquire all of the equity in the home at that point? And then the contrary to that is breach of fiduciary duty, you know, and that's what you go on the other end of it to try to defeat the 852 transmutation. So those are the dynamics that we typically deal with in divorce. They're not unusual, they're common. We see them all the time. And we try to resolve the dispute. And it's oftentimes important to see where the delta is. What are we fighting over with? In other words, are we fighting over $100,000? Are we fighting over $25? I mean, let's try to quantify because how much lawyer fees, angst, and aggravation are we going to put into this dance, so to speak, to get this result? Is it really the squeeze worth the juice? So, if you want,
Like, yeah. Well, and I mean, how many times do you see somebody come in and says, "Well, I owned this house before marriage. It had a pretty good deal of equity in it. But we were married and she wanted to be on title." I'm using very gendered terms because we see this play out. He wanted to be on title, so I put my spouse on title. And typically, what I see, if there's a loan, the lenders are really good at making sure that we are securing our collateral. So inevitably, the documents that you have to sign in order to transfer or change title are going to include the exact right language that the family code requires to be considered a transmutation.
right.
It's going to trigger that
And that
transmutation.
happens in the trust too. These people go in and they go to their trust lawyers, the estate planners of the world, and they march into there. And the estate planners, okay, if you die first, if you die second, if your kid dies third, if the sky falls on something, then this is all planned out. Nothing says about divorce in that estate plan. I mean, I haven't seen an estate plan talk about divorce. Most of them don't say anything. And then these estate planners, they do the 852 transmutation a lot of times, and you just cringe because your client just lost a ton of money because he or she didn't know what they were doing
You know
when they
what's
did it.
interesting on that? I actually had a case a few years ago where that exact same thing happened, where we had a very clearly separate property asset. Couple goes in, transmutation language. There's a case buried in the case law that says if it was incident to just a trust transfer for estate planning purposes only, it is not a valid transmutation in terms of divorce because the intent wasn't there. It changes the nature of the
That's good
intent.
to know.
Cool loophole. I
Yeah,
had to do some digging to find it, but it
sure.
came up at a trial in a case where someone was making that exact claim. Well, look at our trust, nanny nanny. Well, look at this case, nanny nanny, and I
Yeah.
succeeded on
Well,
that.
good.
So
Yeah.
yeah, but people don't know this.
No,
I
they
mean,
don't know
that
that.
required so many hours of very
Sure.
creative lawyering and
Sure.
me doing a lot of digging through Westlaw.
We did a case. It was a very high asset case where we had the lender's intent come in, and so we subpoenaed the guys from Wells Fargo. Say, were you lending to the community or were you lending to him? We finally got a huge result on the case, and the lender said no, we were lending it to him because he had all the wealth and the assets. Because she was looking to pick up a huge portion of a commercial building that he owned because it was acquired during the marriage. So anyway, so we escaped that. But anyway, there's all these little nuances.
Well,
Absolutely.
how does community property? I mean, we touched a lot on real estate here. How does it relate to businesses?
Uh,
And how should we be thinking about this in terms of, maybe there's a business before the marriage, one that happens during the marriage. How should we be thinking about that?
well, I mean, again, we get back to 760. If the business was commenced during the marriage, it's community property, right? That's what it says. So he or she is entitled to half of whatever that is.
Right.
Okay.
That's the easy one.
That's the easy one.
That's the easy
Yeah. Well, it's easy, but you still need to know value of the business.
Right.
You need to know cash flow of the business.
Who does all that, by the way?
Well, typically we have a forensic come in, and says, okay, yeah. So, because, when you have a business and if it's a sole proprietorship or something, a small S Corp or a sole owner as LLC, I mean, you have a business, but you also have all these perks, right? The perks, and they pay for my car, they pay for my suits, they pay for my lunch, they pay for this, they pay for my insurance, and so a lot of that is added back
Right.
to the individual under 4058, which is the income is for child support. Now it's not for spousal support, but I've used it in both scenarios. Um, that's income. And so the court is going to say, well, wait a minute, I'm adding those perks back. I know you get to write them off to the feds, but for this dance, for purposes of domestic determination, that is income. So they add it in, and oftentimes the operator of the business doesn't like that because it takes money out of his or her pocket.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have the separate property business, and now
Oh, yeah.
we have, what I guess the sweat equity that's going into that business when it's
Well,
community.
well,
How does that work?
So, do you want to?
yeah. Well, let me just start
Yeah.
it, then you fill it in.
Yeah.
So let's say, because this is the old law school question in community property.
Yes.
Um, uh, if you have a separate property, so a business before you got married.
Right.
Okay. So we characterize separate property, right? Because that's the character. So then you get married, okay? And then his efforts or her efforts in the business create a community component, typically to that business. And we have the Van Camp Pereira analysis. Okay. So and I'll be I guess, as plain as I can be.
Please do.
Okay. So I think it was Van Camp. I mean, the pork and bean guy wasn't. So he showed up, he had a business that was characterized as separate property.
Pork and beans was his business, right?
I think it was. Yeah.
Let's clarify
That
that.
wasn't like a nickname
No.
he earned some
Yes.
nefarious way.
Yeah. So,
Just want to make that clear.
so but he didn't really do anything in the business. He just showed up and picked up his check.
Right.
So the wife said, well, wait a minute, I get a portion of that business because he worked there. Well, he really didn't. He just gone there and picked up a portion of his check. So the community had no interest. As opposed to Pereira, I think that's the right case. I could be mixing them up, but okay. But it's been
I wouldn't correct you.
48 years,
Yeah, right.
But the concepts are these. If I'm a widget maker and I have my widget business before I get married, and then I get married and I make more widgets and I improve my widget business. So the widget business grows and the community's interest in the business grows. So that's the difference between those two analysis. If a separate property business is characterized as separate property, the guy who owns the business really doesn't do anything. The community,
Passive income thing.
yeah, I just take my income, and then you also get into reasonable comp. The widget maker, was he paid reasonable comp when he was married, so the community doesn't acquire an interest in it, perhaps, because everything he did, he took out of his business and supported the community. So those are the theories and the analysis that typically go. Rachel, it's to you.
Yeah. So, well, the I don't know if somebody taught me this in law school or if I just made this up to make it make sense to me, but because there's a difference in the valuation. And so when you have a business that is, I always remembered Van Camp VC valuable capital, right? So, and that's where you have a business where somebody, like let's say they're a venture capitalist, they just invested in something and then they sat back and
Right.
were like, yeah, okay, great, that's making me money. Or they have like a stock brokerage or something where they're a partner, they're making investments, and the value of the business is the return of the investment. If that initial investment was made before marriage, well, they're not really doing anything to make any more money other than their initial investment. So the community doesn't really have a grasp at that. Whereas where we actually see a good payout in community property terms is the Pereira. So yeah, you had the designations, right?
Okay. It's been a while.
So, like, the Pereira is like somebody who is, like the hot dog maker on the stand on the street corner flipping the hot dogs, right? Yeah, he has some capital invested in his hot dog stand, but if he's not out there flipping the hot dogs and serving the people, right? Like, the business is him. It's his personal services. That those are his efforts. Overall, the theory is if you get married, your all of your all of your toiling and your efforts and your actions during the marriage are considered community property, right? You're doing it for the benefit of the community, regardless of who's doing it. So that's why if you're just a salaried person or an hourly wage earner, all of those paychecks are community property. So same theory is, yeah, you're not going in and getting a paycheck and bringing it home to the community. You're actually using those efforts for self-employment purposes, so we're gonna apply the same theory. It should be there's some interest in the community as a whole or
Based
an
off those
entity
efforts.
based off those
Those
efforts. Um, I find this where you have a separate property business, they get married, and then at the end of the marriage, there's some clawback on community property rights or some community property claim. I find this to be one of the more kind of hotly contested issues when we are talking about prenups because some people think that that's just not a fair exchange, right? I'm going to bring this in. I'll take care of the community, right? Whatever we decide, I'll use this just as my paychecks. I'll pay the mortgage, I'll pay the this, I'll pay the that. Um, but at the end of the day, you still get a claim to my business that I brought in. So I think this is one of those situations where if you have that going into a marriage, it's worth having that conversation. Even if you end up on the same page to say, yeah, no, we're not going to mess with it.
I totally agree with that. I
Yeah.
mean, if you have a business and you don't want to have, the microscope up, you know what, then,
Yeah.
let's go to that prenup
Yep.
because then you won't have that problem. Although, you still have a little bit of that problem because if you have children, they're going to want to know the cash flow analysis. And so the books and records of the business are going to come out, at some point in time. And if there's a spousal support component to it, even though the prenup says you waive spousal support, which may not be the case because we know that could be overturned because of public policy reasons. So, anyway, so it's still, you still are exposed, the business is exposed to some extent, but not to the extent of having an interest in it, which would be very beneficial. Somebody to have a prenup on that, definitely.
Well, a nice pivot here could be like, let's talk debt.
Okay.
Let's talk debt and community property and how
Uh,
that's dealt with.
well, let's make just one big statement. If a community is a negative estate, the community debt can be divided unequally. Okay. So if you go to a divorce lawyer and you say, well, we owe $500,000 and she's got to pay 250 and I'm going to pay 250, the judge doesn't have to do that. The judge can unequally divide it based upon ability, I guess, to pay it. I've not seen a lot of that, but that's what the law says.
So who acquired the debt? Like, is that taken into consideration?
Well, it can be. If you acquired it for drugs and hookers, it's not going to be community. Okay, typically.
You mean that didn't benefit the community?
It didn't benefit.
Depends on who was there with the hookers. If you're both there.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. There you go. So,
See, there's always a loophole.
Yeah, there's, right?
But typically debt, if it's for the community, is CP debt, community debt dividedly. But anyway, just to let the viewers know, if it's a negative estate, it doesn't have to be divided equally. And I think it's important for people to know also that debt, that the divorce court cannot bind third-party creditors, and people look at me and they go, Sullivan, what the hell does that mean? I'm going, well, wait a minute. Let's just assume that I'm Mr. MasterCard, okay? And you guys run up a MasterCard bill of $500,000, okay? So you owe me $500,000. And the judge says that in the division of the debt, your wife has to pay me the $500,000. Well, I don't have to recognize that. I'm going to go after you because you signed my credit application. And I don't care what that judge said in divorce court because I'm not bound by that
Right.
ruling. So in other words, third-party creditors can go after whoever they want, but they can't use community property law to go after the other either. It's a separate deal. So, in other words, divorce court cannot bind a third-party creditor.
And that is why it is so important if you are settling your divorce case and you have some element of control over that settlement agreement, you have to have an indemnification clause in there. You must have an indemnification clause.
And
So
especially for taxes too. Taxes always, we owe back taxes, and the government doesn't care. They're gonna, well, you signed the tax return. I don't give a shit what
Mhm.
that judge said.
Yeah,
It gets
just
divided.
pay it.
Yeah, I'm going. It's the path of least resistance for all creditors. It's just going to go to the person who can pay first.
So, for our listeners who didn't go to law school, indemnification means what?
It means if I'm assigned a debt in the divorce agreement, I'm going to take the $50,000 Amex bill and Amex goes after you. I now need to step into your shoes and either reimburse you to Amex or work out a deal directly with Amex where I'm now shielding you for the responsibility that I took on by receiving or being assigned this debt in the divorce agreement.
Anything else you want to add to that explanation?
Oh, you can have that in the agreement, but you can't get blood from the turnip. In other words, you can say, "Oh, I got this reimbursement agreement," but she doesn't have anything. So good luck with that, bucko.
You mean you need to have the means to actually be able to make
Yeah, to
whatever the
collect
clause-
on it.
Yes.
Yeah, and you can always go after the person, I think, to say, "Hey, you were assigned the debt, you didn't pay it, you're back in divorce court. Hey, judge, she or he didn't pay it. I want them to reimburse me." Well, okay. Do they have anything to reimburse you?
And oftentimes they find themselves in that exact situation because why did the creditor go after the other spouse? Well, it's probably because this person wasn't worth nothing anyway, right?
So when you do your marital balance sheet, it's important that you figure out, let's get rid of the debt load if you can. Let's liquidate that so we don't have these dangling, participles, so to speak, whatever that is or was in English class, out there.
Well, and let's not assign debt to somebody that we know isn't going to be able to pay it or has historically just been kind of an ass and hasn't paid anything anyway, right? Like if you've got someone who's got a huge child support arrearage when you're settling your divorce, don't give them the credit card debt because they don't, like you said, they don't give a shit. So they're going to get you into bigger trouble and now you're going to chase them.
Let's be smart with how the debt's being assigned.
Yeah, you'll get a
Being
piece.
hit
I
on.
mean, you can run in the court and get pieces of paper to say she owes or he owes me this or that, but it's a piece of paper.
Right.
Yeah.
What's
So,
that worth?
yeah.
Well, let's pivot real quick into like some of the high conflict, high asset parts of community property with trust or stock options or deferred compensation. For some of those things, how does the court handle community property as it relates to um,
Trust.
yeah, like the trust issues and or the deferred comp stock option.
Oh, I don't know. We can cover trust real quick.
Okay.
I mean, let's just say, what I often tell clients, they have trust. Okay. And it's a box, and you put your stuff in it, right? I put my G.I. Joe in one box and she puts her Barbie doll in the box and we put it all in a box and that's our trust box, right? And then it doesn't affect community property because I don't care if it's in the trust, it's still community property or separate property unless they transmute it in the trust. Okay. So, I mean, it really, it isn't a big component, I think, in going through a divorce. I mean, we get copies of the trust. We look at the trust. Again, I cringe to look at the 852 transmutations. Are they in there? Are they out of there? Those types of things. And a lot of times trusts, though, give us important information as to who owned what before that they got married because they'll list the assets A and B, like a prenup does or something. So that kind of helps you figure out who owned what and what they were valued with prior to the marriage. But the trust isn't going to change the characterization of an asset. It's still either going to be CP or SP.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't give away something you don't own, right? So I get this question a lot is,
I just
well,
try and do that all the time.
you can tell them legally,
Yes.
this is illegal.
Yeah. It's illegal.
But I do get this question a lot of, well, if if let's say my husband died and he had an individual trust that gave our house and his, his, I don't know, savings account or whatever to his kids before we were married. Well, if they're community property, you can't give away what you don't own. So if he only owned 50% of the house, let's say for example, he can't give away her share of the house. So now you've got, you've got a trust litigation on your hands, but that's how
Probate case.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but that's how you well, not probate if it's a trust, right?
Yeah.
But the let me be right all the time. But you can't give away what you don't own, and community property is their legal property rights, it's ownership rights, Um, so and then we were gonna talk about
Talking about some stock options and or deferred comp.
okay, my favorite. Stock options are they have their own set of rules and they're fairly complicated. Like RSUs, there's formulas that you can use to figure out what component was community property. You get into when they were offered and then when they were exercisable and the values of when it was offered and when it was exercised. And, you have to get into all of that detail.
They're going to, if I may, they
Yes.
typically have RSUs or restricted stock options, typically referred to that. And so and they're offered to employees to keep them there. In other words, hey, I'm going to dangle this carrot and we don't want you to go down the road to a different company. And so we're going to give you more carrots if you stay here. And we'll give you these carrots at these values. And at the end of a year or 2 years when they vest, you're going to get more carrots because they're going to increase, But there's always, I've never seen one without a vesting schedule. So these corporations who issue these RSUs or restricted stock options, they'll have investment. They'll have a schedule of the grant date and the vesting date, and then it's a pro rata. It's a pro rata component, a pro rata share that the community has. In other words, if the guy was, 6 months, from January 1 to June 1st, these were the grant dates, these are the vesting dates, then we figure out a pro rata percentage that the community had in those options. And then the spouse can either, in some of them and most of them, I'll take them and run with them and stay, or you can buy me out of them depending upon, how they're structured and such. And so, sometimes it's better to get a payout, get your bucks. There's no taxes on divorce. They haven't taxed it yet, you know.
Coming
So,
soon.
so coming
Take
soon,
it for
probably
you.
coming soon. Yeah. No equalization payment tax. So that's the RSUs or stock options. So typically how they deal with those.
RSUs are way easier if they were offered and vested during the marriage. But when you get some crossover where it was like, they're granted on this date, they don't vest until post separation, and the intent was to incentivize someone to continue working with that company because that goalpost comes up after separation. So you've now converted all of your efforts and your work during the marriage from community property to back to separate property. So now the argument is, well, if it was still vesting while I was still working and it was an incentive stock option, do I have a community property interest or is it all separate property, right? So it can be complex. That's why you want to hire a family law attorney who knows what they're doing to sort through all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
But and then it even get more complicated. I just finished a case wherein the new company, the guy left, the new company he was going to purchased all of his options and then gave him a signing bonus. So then the question becomes, is that a component, the signing bonus of community or separate property? When did he know about it? When did he execute it? Those types of things. So it gets a little sticky, but again, family court, and you can always go back to, Your Honor, this is a court of equity. This is a court of fairness, right? Because, you don't always have to, get the slide rule out and say, well, this is the middle and divide by two. The court has broad discretion when it comes to, Epstein credits or Watts credits, and how to divide up some of these assets. So if they think that one spouse is getting over on the other spouse, they can change that in a big way. And they can change it, maybe not on that one issue, but they can change it on attorney's fees. They can change it on sanctions. They can change it by way of child support or spouse support. So they have a way of dealing with, let's be fair and try to get equity, so to speak, between these two people.
Yeah, the judges will look at a situation
Most of them.
overall and say, because we're all human, and we've got, like, let's not forget that we're dealing with divorcing parties and kids involved in all of this. So very often we see these judges go, okay, you might be right on that technical argument, and okay, yeah, you got your expert in and this and that and blah blah blah. I don't like that your client did this,
Right. Oh,
whatever
yeah.
it may be.
Right.
So I'm going to right side it. So yeah, maybe you proved your claim for an extra $50,000 of, separate property interest in those RSUs. I think he was a jerk when he did A, B, C, and D. So I'm going to award her $40,000 in attorney's fees.
Yeah.
So it's like
You
exactly
see
your
that.
point.
You see
Yeah.
that. So, again, if you're going through the dance, divorce, it's important, I think, for people to know, don't get the government involved if you don't have to. And the government worker is the guy or the gal in the black dress who sits on the high bench with the flags behind him, right? And they get there for different reasons, but the governor appoints them. Okay, most of them. So what they know or don't know, we'll never know, about community property or whatever. But if you can stay out of the fray and not have the government, and you get two smart lawyers involved in trying to, let's make a deal. Let's make our own bet here. Let's not have the government raise our children. Let's not have the government, decide who gets what bank accounts. We can figure this out. We can be adults about this, right? We can figure out how to do a marital balance sheet and be kind of fair to one another and avoid the acrimony and everything that goes with being, in a contentious dissolution of marriage. But if you want to fight, I get it. I've been in the ring 48 years. I know how to counter punch. I know how to punch. I know how to duck and dive. So I know how to fight it. But again, I try to resolve as many as I can because I think it's good for the client. Yeah.
Well, do we have any final takeaways on the community property front that we want to let our listeners, viewers know? Because we are audio and visual, so they can see and hear us. So what is it that
I didn't know they could see me.
they could see us too?
Oh, that changes everything.
There's a camera in front of
I
you.
thought I was invisible, though. God, I hate that.
So what is it that they should take away after hearing,
Well-
this whole conversation on community property? Why is this important? Why do they need to know?
They need to know their rights. They need to know the analogy I would give to a client. Imagine you're going into a dark room. You have no shoes on, right? You don't know where the furniture is. And we all know when we stub our toe on furniture, we jump around and we hold our toe, right? And it hurts like hell, right? All we're going to do is turn on the light so you know where the furniture is, so you don't stub your toe, so you don't hurt like hell, so you know what to expect and what not to expect. So that's what they should that's what they need to know when they go to a family attorney, to say, hey, be honest with me, be candid with me. Tell me what I can expect. Tell me what I cannot expect. Tell me what's probably going to happen here, And 48 years of this, I could probably tell them pretty close to what's going to happen, And then let's try to make a deal. Let's try to, stop the bleeding, stop the acrimony. Let's just march forward and close the door, So I think that's what they should know.
Rachel?
Don't let your marriage be like walking into a dark room with the light turned off.
I like that.
Right? I think there's personal power and understanding what kind of contract you're signing from the very beginning. And I think that strengthens your relationship with your spouse to know what our property rights are between each other, what our duties are to each other, and really ultimately our relationship is going to be stronger because we now understand how much we are interconnected on the finances and the property rights. And I'm going to make a decision that's going to impact you. And you're going to make decisions that are going to impact me. Let's make them together, because the law is going, if we end up divorcing, the law is going to decide that we've made these decisions together, whether or not we did. So I think empowering yourself with that information, whether you're married or contemplating marriage, don't wait until you're getting a divorce to find out what all of this means.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah. Family law in high school, maybe. Yeah. Teach the
I've
kids
heard it
what.
said
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. They don't know. I mean, you teach them all this other stuff, and most of us go through this divorce process, and nobody says anything about it.
Yes.
Nobody knows what community property is or isn't, or separate property or titles or anything. Nobody knows. But they go out and get married right away, right out of high school. There we go. That's
Financial
exciting.
literacy as well. I mean, that's something that
Yeah.
probably should be
Huge. It's huge. And when you have I mean, how many divorces do we see that one of the primary reasons that they had their irreconcilable differences was caused from finances, right? Not being on the same page and having different levels of financial literacy.
I don't know that prenup's gonna cure that, because, I'm gonna be gender. She spends and she likes to spend, and and they typically financial, I, I don't know. I mean, I won't go down that road, but
too late. Already did.
Yeah, but don't you think you got me started. Don't you think it's better to have the conversation than not, right? Because it's an awkward conversation
but does
to
it?
have.
But it is. But don't things change? I mean, when people get married, we don't have any kids. We're young. We're dumb. We're happy. We're having sex on the counter. Everything's great. She's working. I'm working. Here comes
Thanks,
little.
Dad.
Yeah.
Here comes little Johnny. Oh, and here comes little Mary. And let's see. Daycare is $2,500 per kid. Oh, we didn't think about that. And let's see. It's cheaper for you to stay home and not work because little Johnny and little Mary's here. So you better stay home, and I'm going to go out there and still make a buck. And all of a sudden, I'm working, 60 hours a week, and you're working 80 hours a week because those little butthead kids we have are needy, right? And so things change, and money changes, and it's not this business deal we had. All of a sudden, the wheels are starting to wobble, right? And his needs aren't being met, and her needs aren't being met, and here we go, divorce city. So, I mean, and maybe I'm talking. I think I'm talking reality. It's what I think I'm talking, but not this is our deal and this is what we're going to do, because typically that's how it works.
Well, I mean, it makes sense to have a conversation with your spouse about what it is that you can and can't afford in life,
Well, sure.
and
Well,
how to go along that road, and just have those conversations as life does change.
Yeah.
What's our budget? Like, what are our means? How much are we going to spend on groceries and things of that nature? Yes, I do think part of this is, or maybe a large part of this is, not being able to handle the financial component of it, and needs not being met in a different way on the financial
sure.
scale of things.
Yeah. Well, and then you not only get into the children coming in, maybe you get into illnesses.
Yes.
Maybe you
Okay.
get into addictions. Okay, now he or she's drinking too much, or there's drug problems, and there's all of these other things that you didn't see, in this happy moment when you were getting married at 20 something years old, and here they are, they're in your face now.
Life comes at you fast.
It does.
I think that's
And the thing is, and people should understand, don't put your kids through that stuff. Let them have good models. So, we stayed together for the kids. Bullshit. You stayed together for the kids, so the cop cars could come to the house, so they can hear the screaming and yelling, so they could hear the cussing and fighting. That's what the model that you gave those kids. Great job, because they're going to be just like you. And just like you when they grow up. Yeah. Instead of getting away from the dysfunction and moving on in an appropriate manner. Anyway, that's how I'm going to end mine.
Yeah. Well, the diatribe at the end of this.
Yeah, it's a diatribe. I'm
we
sorry.
went off the rails there.
Yeah, we did. We did. Okay.
All right. Well, I think that concludes episode 2, round 2 here.